this new feature. It's been out, for a little bit, but the goal is to hopefully get you guys really familiar with it. And for people who are like trying to find tools or whatever the case may be that might not already be IntelliGRC users that are trying to figure out a way to solve this kind of problem that we're going to be going over here today, hopefully this will all help with that. So that's the goal of today's webinar. Do want to just briefly, just for because I know it's going to come up, just briefly touch on the CMC Phase 2 suspension.
Hot topic right now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Hot topic. It's not really the main goal of this webinar. Wasn't the main goal of this webinar. Again, if you have questions about it at the end, I'm happy to, answer what I can. But just so that we're covering it up front, so it's not on people's minds as we're dealing with all the other stuff. Phase 2 was suspended. The DoD CIO Kristen Davies sent that out on Monday. So what that means is all the things that we're going to be promulgating into contracts as a result of the Phase 2 kickoff. So the C3PAO certification requirements and some of the, at the DoD's discretion, the CMMC Level 3 DIBCAC assessment requirements, that's all been suspended for the time being. I don't want to use the word pause because nobody's using that word officially, and pause infers that it's going to be resumed. We don't know that. So there's a 60-day review going on that's underway. It's expected to be done somewhere middle of November, or sorry, middle of September. And I anticipate it will take a little bit longer after that review is done for us to hear anything. I could be wrong, but that's the goal. That's what I'm hoping for. What that also means is that any current solicitations during this Phase 1 that we're in right now of the CMMC phase rollout, is any of the solicitations that had the C3PAO certification requirements ahead of schedule that the DoD had every right to include. Those have to be stripped out of solicitations and contracts as the language is like as soon as practical or something like that. So overarching, all the third-party assessment certification elements are suspended right now. That's the main point that we're trying to get across here. What is still required? Phase 1 requirements are still required. You are still required to submit your self-assessment expectations for Level 1. And if you have a CMC Level 2 self-assessment expectation on your contract as part of your DFAR 7021, 7025 clauses, then just know that that's not going away, or it hasn't gone away, at least at this point. CMMC Level 2 self-assessments are still totally valid. You still have to enter your SPRS entries, all that jazz. So none of that has changed. Your DFAR 7012 obligations have not changed. So all the reporting requirements for incidents and maintaining, malicious code for forensic review and all that jazz. The FedRAMP requirements, that's a whole nother, we can do a whole nother webinar on that. But that's all still in play. The 801.71 Rep 2 requirements are still in full force. So the point is, none of that is an excuse. None of this is an excuse for you to stop doing those things. So keep on keeping on. And I will say, I do believe that this is my personal opinion. I could be totally wrong. I do suspect that there is a correlation between the FAR CUI stuff, the FAR CUI rule stuff, and the FAR overhaul and what caused the suspension. I could be wrong about that, but I think because of the overarching federal approach to CUI protections with Rev 3 and whatnot, and some of the stuff that we've seen recently, as well as the transition from Rev 2, Rev 3 conversation that was kind of hinted at in the whether it purposefully or not hinted at in the unified agenda. I just think there's a lot of correlative effects. So the reason I say that is don't stop doing what you're supposed to be doing, right? This is all correlative. There's a purpose behind it. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. Maybe there'll be some more modernization efforts or something like that. But the point is keep on keeping on with your DFAR 7012 requirements, which is what the CMMC program existed to verify you were doing in the first place. Okay. That's all still in place, still enforceable. And probably considering Rev 3, which is one of the reasons why we're doing this webinar, is prepping for it or even moving towards it is probably incredibly prudent right now. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. I know I didn't anticipate spending time on that originally, but thought it was worthwhile. So getting back into what the webinar was actually about today, there's a common problem that we see um, when in assessments and in prepping for assessments that um, we just kind of see all the time. And it's kind of we kind of laid it out in this scenario where you say you're on day two of the assessment. You've done all the work of compiling the evidence, compiling your documentation, writing it all, getting it ready to be handed over to the assessor for their review. And you get to like day two or something, and you're like, oh my goodness, my policy says 90 days of inactivity. To use an example, 90 days of inactivity before an account has to be disabled, but my SSP says 60 days of inactivity before my accounts have to be disabled. And now you're scrambling, now you're stressed out, now you're freaking out. And thankfully, a lot of the C3POs are really chill and they'll let you, they'll work with you to get updates to your documents and stuff like that. But nonetheless, it's one more thing to juggle while you're already stressed out about this big deal, expensive assessment that you've just, you're underway in. And the what feels weird is like nobody intentionally made that variance, right? Nobody intentionally changed the SSP to say from 90 to 60 or something like that. People were acting more than likely in good faith and were, it just happened to be a mistake or an inconsistency that has some other obvious reason, a legitimate reason. And, this documentation consistency problem, it's like one of the most common things we see. And Jeremy can attest to that. And today we're kind of going to talk about the way that we've approached remediating or structurally mitigating that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Steve, this isn't something that we've seen, just once or twice. I think it's a common mistake that happens. There's a lot of moving pieces, especially in the days leading up to the assessment. So, if a value changes or something changes in your documentation, you're trying to identify, hey, where did I say this, right? Where do I need to update this now? And you can easily miss one. So like you said, that's what we're trying to address with what we built into the app. And I think we've done a good job at trying to solve that pain point.
Yeah, I agree. And so the answer to that is our approach to this concept of ODPs and ODVs. So before we get into what that looks like and how we've approached it, let's just lay the groundwork. And Jeremy, please jump in with your perspectives here wherever you want. But at a high level, an organization defined parameter or ODP, what you see here, is something that's in a framework, particularly a NIST-based framework, um, that gives the organization a blank check, if you will, to specify a particular requirement or value of a requirement related to things like frequency or certain subjective things that might vary from organization to organization. So it's that blank check field or that parameter is really what, that's why it's called an organization defined parameter. Whereas an organization defined value is the specific value that satisfies what the parameter is getting at. So, for example, say the organization defined parameter is that you have to review permissions at a certain frequency. The organization defined parameter is the frequency, or it's the particular type of context. Maybe it's a situation instead of a frequency or something like that. But it gives you that blank check. Whereas the value is you have to review those permissions quarterly. That's the value that satisfies that parameter. And so that's what we're talking about today is how IntelliGRC has taken that concept to satisfy that other concern that we were talking about in the scenario in the previous slide.
Yeah, and I think it's important to talk about the terms first, right? Because even internally, when we were working on developing this feature and addressing ODPs and ODVs, at times we're using the word variable instead of parameter. So that starts to get confusing when you're talking about ODVs. Are we talking about a value or are we talking about a variable? So it's something we
Yeah.
got on the same page with internally. And then, so if we use ODV today during the webinar, we're talking about the organization defined value.
Yeah, yeah. And another note here is these are values, these are parameters and values that need to be consistent across the board because especially going into this next slide, I mean, we have some examples here. And again, we'll send out the slide deck for anybody who wants to look at more longer into some of these slides. But um, where this kind of where the rubber meets the road is these are values that need to be consistent because and why it's important now is because of things like Rev 3 that where these values never really had to be or at least the way of doing these values never really had to be dealt with by many organizations. So, ODPs are not a new concept. They are something that have been built and enshrined in NIST 853, for example, and they're not a new concept, and they're not even in a way, they're not even a new concept for Rev 2 of NIST 800-171. Um, in principle, that concept or that principle still was real. It's just that under Rev 2, and just a review is 110 requirements, 320 assessment objectives. But the things that needed to be defined, like the frequency to review something or the process for, reviewing your audit event types for that, the AU family requirement. Um, those were actually part of the assessment objectives. Those were the things, the defining of those things were actually an assessment objective that was part of the 320 under Rev 2. Whereas in Rev 3, you have 97 requirements, 422 assessment objectives, so it's definitionally a lot more work. But on top of those 422 assessment objectives, now you also have these ODPs, values that need to be applied and verified and defined and attested to, so that on top of the assessment objectives, which then use them, right, or the requirements that then use them. So it's the individual requirements under Rev 3 are way more expansive. There's a lot more work here, and this is one of the reasons why we wanted to kind of streamline and provide some functionality that would help with this, is because this is already a lot more work for DoD contractors.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard kind of mistakenly from some people they look at the high level requirements, right? And they're 110 from Rev 2 to 97 in Rev 3 and think it's a reduction, but it's really not. They've expanded on quite a bit. And Rev 3 is something that we wanted to support in the app for quite a while now, even going back to, last year. But because of this ODP and how they handle them and the complexities that come around them, we wanted to address ODPs first with
Yeah.
that functionality we're going to be getting into. But yeah, it was really important for us to provide users of IntelliGRC with an easy way to manage them. So
Yeah, exactly. It would have been we absolutely could have just added Rev 3 as like a, a a framework as we do it now or did it previously before we added the ODVs. We could have absolutely done it in a way where we just copy paste the control and then copy paste the assessment objectives and have them as their own line items and just had this kind of unintuitive, unuseful thing that kind of satisfies the bare minimum. But, we'll get to in a second. We don't do that until or at least we try not to. We want to actually be useful. We want to actually make your lives easier. So that, and this is already a complex, GRC expectation under Rev 3, as many of you probably who are preparing for Rev 3 know. So, so just to give a little bit more context, so what is the ODV Rev 3 kind of ODP, ODV, and then Rev 3 kind of crossover look like? What does that look like in practice? And I'm not going to go through each of these examples, but just to take the first one, for example, just to make sure conceptually we're all on the same page. ODPs, the what you define, right, is for, say, maybe the very first family of requirements, say the 3.1.5, to use this first example. That ODP would be, say, the frequency at which to review those assigned privileges. You see that, the review the privileges assigned to roles and classes of users, organization defined frequency to validate the need for such privileges. The ODP is the frequency for reviewing assigned privileges. And then an example ODV, the value that would be assigned to that parameter, your organization's answer to that what you define question is at least every 12 months. Or again, this is just an example. You don't have, we're not saying you have to use every 12 months. This is an example of what you might define. And so, what conceptually in your heads and how it's going to be assessed is you would read that value into that placeholder of that parameter. So you would say, review the privileges assigned to roles of classes of users or classes of users at least every 12 months to validate the need for such privileges. That's kind of how this works. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're jumping into this in the next slide, but it is kind of a misnomer that for at least for div contractors
Many,
that
yeah.
you're defining these for yourself because the DoD has already kind of gone and done that for you. At least for the vast majority of them. Steve, I think there's what one maybe that they give guidance
Yeah.
on, but they don't.
87 of the 88 NIST 800-171 Rev 3 ODPs are prescribed already by
Yeah,
the DoD. One of them has guidance, helpful
right.
guidance to instead of a prescription to say you have to do it this way, but they do
Yeah,
still provide feedback. So they do kind of
yeah.
um, squeeze the life out of your flexibility a little
Yeah, so for
bit.
the div, yeah, you're not really defining these. You're adopting what the DoD has prescribed for you. We show these to you as well in the app, so there's no mistakes there, right? But important to note.
Yeah. And I would say, just a point of clarification, the concept is still true. The concept behind what it defines an ODP and ODV is still true. It's just that the organization doing the defining is different, right? Um, you're taking the organization, being the DoD in this at this point, is they're the ones that have the risk that needs to be mitigated through the use of these requirements, and therefore they're ODPs and ODVs. And so they're the ones that are providing those values. It's still at the end of the day an ODP and ODV, even to you. It's just who's the one doing the defining for div contractors who will fall under this memo of prescribed controls. Obviously, there's some questions up in the air about the transition to Rev 3 and CMMC and all this stuff. I'm setting all that aside. If what is today lives on, right, and we don't see like a revocation of 800-171 for some other modernization or something like that, this is what we're talking about. Is you'll already have values to, you don't get to, I guess, vary from them, is what we're really trying to say,
And
if you're
similar,
going to be under that.
yeah, and it's similar to FedRAMP, or at least the
Yeah.
um, not considering the consolidated rules that just came out,
Yeah.
that overall
Previous
the
baseline.
FedRAMP, yeah, the previous baseline, there
Yeah.
was prescribed values for some of those as well.
Yeah, exactly. If anybody's familiar with RMF, ATOs and how AOs go through their process of risk assessment and then just, tailoring the 853 and whatnot, this is part of that process. Is they're defining these. It just so happens that the DoD has kind of already defined it for you. That's what this is. So that, the problem, kind of referring back to our earlier scenario, is, if your current approach to ODPs and ODVs, especially if you've already started on it, is they're in documents somewhere. They live some, they're defined. They're defined. We're doing the definitions, which you can do it that way. You can define it in just a document or spreadsheet or something like that, or in your SSP directly, whatever the case may be. Um, there's still this risk that we see being pretty obvious, and this goes for all of the frameworks, not just which we'll get to in a second, but it's still pretty obvious that the risk of inconsistencies within your documentation is going to be higher, and that the maintenance of these values um, is going to be painful. So, and has been painful. It has been painful. Anecdotally, it has been painful for people even before Rev 3 is the thing that they're moving to. So that leads us into what we've kind of built and what we wanted to make sure people are familiar with and aware of, especially if you're already a user that just hasn't gotten to transition or move to this feature. We want you to be aware of it. So this is where we introduced ODPs and ODVs. So back in February, we added a dedicated section under governance to where you will set, review, update, and update your organization defined values for all the parameters that are relevant to the frameworks we support. Okay. Jeremy, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I mean, so we've applied this concept of ODPs to all frameworks because maybe a framework like NIST 80171 Rev 2 doesn't specifically call them out as ODPs.
Right.
It's in the subtext of the requirements, right? So and for other frameworks, it's no different. So we've applied this to all frameworks that we support so that you can get the value out of this feature of using these dynamic values in your documentation and maintaining them in one place.
Yeah,
But
and the goal is, I think, as you can see on the slide, our heart and our goal is to make people's lives easier as they're doing all these GRC things. And so one of the ways to do that is having a single pane source of truth to do those efforts. So, you know, the value doesn't live in multiple different documents in reality. It lives in one place. And this also gives people the ability to define multiple values per ODP if the context needs it, right? So there's different, you can have different instances of the same ODP with different values for different situations. Say you have multiple boundaries in IntelliGRC, and so you want to ODV for your, say, an HQ boundary that is addressing your entire company, or maybe it's a business unit inside that and you have a boundary for them, but they have a more strict or more unique variable. This gives you, the world is your oyster. This gives you the single pane of glass that then lets you manage all those different facets without having to, you know, pull up 8 million different documents, to
right.
align. This is one place. So we acknowledge that probably some of the things that you're hearing are like, well, this is a new feature. There's a lot of ODPs, a lot of ODVs. It's probably going to be a little bit of work getting there. And like acknowledged, we actually agree that this is a complex concept just regardless, because it's also something that is going to impact your documents across the board. It's going to impact your implementation statements in your SSP, which I'll get to in a second. But we did have a realization that we really want people to adopt this because we really believe that this is going to make people's lives easier. And so what we've done is we added right out the gate, a as part of the MVP of this feature, we added things that assist people in getting started right at the beginning, related to automated detection of values and bulk actions. Jeremy, do you want to touch on that, Mr. Functional Lead?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I think these are really, really cool. For the automated value detection, we can look at your interview question responses. We can look at benchmark results from connected integrations. We can look at evidence generated from those integrations. And we can look at files that you've uploaded to IntelliGRC and try to detect possible values for each of these ODPs because it's likely that if you already have policies in place or some kind of documentation in place, you've likely already defined these somewhere, or maybe you have, it's configured somewhere, right, in your Microsoft environment, and we can pull that for you. So that's one of the big things is automatically detecting those values first, and then you can use our bulk value creation wizard to create them in bulk instead of going one by one through 88 of Rev 3's ODPs and creating values for each of them. You can create them on a prioritization basis. So for Rev 3, if you're a div contractor, you're saying, well, the DoD's already defined these for me. First and foremost, I want to make sure that I'm using whatever they've prescribed, right? So in this wizard, you can rank those priorities. You can say if it has if it has a prescribed value, I want it to use that. If it doesn't have a prescribed value, I want it to fall back to the value that was detected for the ODP. And then let's say that both of those fall through, then you can fall back to our suggested value. Well, we have suggested values for many of these. So this is a way for you to really create them quickly, start adopting them quickly, and then kind of refining them from there.
Yeah, and you want to talk about what happens when you have a prescribed value, say from like the DoD. So we have that already in there. But say you have a previous document before you're transitioning to Rev 3 or something like that from your Rev 2 work, that you have a value that's less than or different than the value that the DoD prescribes, for example? What happens in those situations?
Yeah, so the this bulk value detection or creation is all based on priority. So you can basically say no matter what, I want to set it to the DoD prescribed value, but we're still going to display that detected value that you've already set maybe in a policy as a potential conflict with what you've now created in IntelliGRC.
Got it. Yeah, and one thing to, I guess, get off my chest is you got to do we have to do this anyway for Rep 3. This is a function of defining these parameters, giving them their values. It's something that has to be done for Rep 3 anyway. It has to be defined anyway. And it doesn't mean that you guys, working with these with this, even if you use the automated stuff to get started, it doesn't mean you're going to jump right into using them and it's going to mess up all your documents or anything like that. But this doing this step, getting started, will at least lay the groundwork, the foundation for you to start using them and embedding them where we need to go, which is going to jump into my next our next slide here. So once you've defined the values, and you're comfortable with where they're at, you kind of used your current documentation or say the DoD's prescribed values, whatever the case may be. I mean, we're really focusing on Rev 3, but just keep in mind this applies to the other frameworks too. Um, but once you've defined your values, they're not just static. They don't just exist in this thing that will then spit out like a spreadsheet, even though we do have an export for it, because some assessors, I'm assuming in the future, will want to see kind of a cumulative list of your ODVs, similar to how like the SSP for like a FedRAMP package will have all the ODVs at the top or something like that of each requirement. But we'll have a cumulative export for that. It's already there. But they're not just static for that purpose. They're functional, dynamic objects. They are usable, they're reusable, they're applied across different key locations for consistency and reducing your manual effort. So, in addition to like that export that I was just talking about, and just also keep in mind that Alfie uses these values as well and its considerations if you so choose to apply them and set them up. It's also something. The main thing is that you will be able to inject them into your implementation statements of your SSP in the gap analysis section, as well as into the document hub to ensure that those two stay aligned. Jeremy, if you want to talk about Alfie and whatnot, and then how that's
Yeah, just a quick note about Alfie. I know we have some folks listening that maybe aren't IntelliGRC users. Alfie is our automated assessment tool. So it can look at an assessment objective and the evidence for that assessment objective and make a recommendation on whether that assessment objective is implemented or not implemented. And it will also help write the SSP implementation statement for you. If it doesn't believe that the assessment objective is implemented, it can identify findings and provide recommendations for how to fix that, right? So we could spend another webinar just on Alfie.
yeah, just on Alfie. Yeah, Alfie's fun. He is a time saver, that's for sure. But just to kind of wrap up the concept for injecting,
Um,
it's important to know that we hear the concern, because some people are already using this feature. We hear the concern about, okay, well, if I inject this everywhere, um, what does that look like for the long term? And so the main goal, which is what we've been kind of trying to drive home this whole time, is that instead of having to hand jam the value that you're putting into, say, your policy and then your SSP to describe what your policy requires, et cetera, you would inject a dynamic value that maps back to a parent object inside of IntelliGRC that if you needed to update that value, so say, let's use the example, say you went from a 90-day inactivity period for inactive accounts before they needed to be disabled down to a 60-day or 30-day, whatever value that you wanted to do to be more secure or something like that, instead of you having to go to your policy and your procedure or your implementation statement, all these different documents that kind of reference that same value, that same concept, you would go back to the ODP section, ODV section of the app, change that value in one place, and that would propagate to the different documents that use that value, that you've injected that value in. And just a quick note of, we can already, I can feel it like the hairs on the back of my neck. Um, the concern about, well, what if I already have documentation that has been published or documentation that's been formalized and whatnot? I mean, Jeremy can probably speak to this, too, but we have an approach to the published versus, the published concern, so it's not automatically changing things.
Yeah, so in Document Hub, we have a versioning system, review and approval system. So we're tracking if one of those Document Hub documents that's been published. So it's made it through the review and approval process and has been published. It's been formalized. We're tracking if that published document is using one of these ODVs, and if that ODV changes, we can create a new draft version for you to then go through that review and approval process and be formalized again. And similarly with the SSP, if you're using one of these in an SSP implementation statement, you're also able to, version your SSP, mark it as read only, so these things aren't changing while you're in the middle of an assessment or something like that, right? We want to avoid that. So we've thought about those cases as well.
Yeah, don't let the concern that you'll have messy documentation if you use this feature stop you from using it, because we've thought about that. We have mitigations in place, like Jeremy just said. And again, this is such an important thing to get done right. And we know the complexity, especially in this space of doing documentation work. We live that. We just do things that make your life a little easier,
Yeah,
but still get across the board. Yeah.
I think this will help clean up your documentation.
Yes.
Definitely not messy it.
Yeah. All right. So okay. Conceptually, hopefully that makes sense. Again, we have Q&A at the end if there's something you want to dig into deeper for this side. But there's another purpose for the way that we implemented ODVs and ODPs and ODVs. And that is beyond the initial implementation, beyond the initial documentation, et cetera. It's also Kanban, right? Maintaining course. We do not want people um, setting and forgetting it, but then having no means to aid them in maintaining it. To think back to the scenario at the beginning about mid-assessment, drift happens, configurations change, policies get updated, these values do evolve. And IntelliGRC, the same detection capability that helped you set up your initial values quickly, right? We already talked about that, is also the same capability that is meant to aid you in keeping your values aligned. And so that's kind of a key element of this as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really cool and powerful capability that, for example, if we think about a organization defined parameter like password length, required password length, right? If you've set that value here in IntelliGRC to 15 characters, but you've also connected one of our integrations that's pulling that as a configuration, right? And it's showing 8 characters. We're going to identify that as a potential conflict for you to come in and address it, however you see fit, right?
Right.
Maybe that value is correct, that configuration went through, and the documentation is out of sync.
Yeah, it,
Um,
it very well may be the case that after sifting through new pieces of evidence that you've uploaded and policies and yeah, like the integrations that Jeremy just mentioned, very well may be the case that, oh, I actually need to update things. And that might be that perfect opportunity for you to update your policies, your SSP implementation statement, all with, one approach. Yeah. So hopefully that's helpful, and hopefully that kind of obviously we're not doing like a demo or anything like that to see how it works live, but hopefully that kind of captures the picture. One thing that we've not really talked too much about, and Jeremy's going to speak to here in a second, is we've been talking at the tenant level. We've been talking about like for the kind of the everyday users, but there's also another key stakeholder, key player in especially in CMMC div contractor world that need some love and need some help understanding this. And so we have these MSPs or these multi-tenant admins for like say enterprise multiple business unit scenarios where you have like higher level companies that then have multiple business units under them that they manage. This feature is also has some admin app capabilities as well for propagation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think definitely encourage you if you're a provider and MSP that wants to take a deeper look at this, schedule a call with us. We're going to touch on it briefly here, but you're able to manage these ODPs and their values at what we call the license level, right? And then push them out to your tenants. And you'll have the ability to kind of lock those values, make them non-editable for the tenants that I guess for lack of a better term, kind of inherit them, right?
Yeah.
Um, but well, one of the things that we've done in IntelliGRC is make sure that we're building things that can be, help providers manage their clients, across many tenants, right? So this is one of the things that we added on. You can use them in Document Hub templates in the admin app, and then again push them out to your tenants. So it's really powerful and a great way to manage multiple of your clients at the same time.
Yeah, definitely follow up with your account manager if you want more of a deep dive. We're definitely wanting people to adopt this because it's going to make your lives easier. Um, So what does it kind of look like in practice, in reality? One of the day-to-day kind of examples of how this would be used is in your documents. And so say I have an access control policy here in this dummy tenant that I have to play around with new features and stuff. And so instead of me hand jamming the value for this ODP for this 6.1.14 section of my policy that says account managers must be notified of users termination within instead of me typing 1 day, right, and having to maintain that value in this document isolated from everything else, I will use the at symbol and I will inject the value. I'll just type the name of the value, and then that will promulgate the value that is assigned from that ODP that I just injected. And it'll show up there so you can read it, like actually read the word 1 day, but it's referring, that's why it's highlighted in blue here. It's referring back to the value that has been set in the ODP ODV section of the app. So that I also, when I use this in the implementation statement for my SSP, the value is again injected with the at symbol and then the name of the ODP. And that way, like we've kind of been saying this whole time, when we go back and we say, okay, 1 day is a really long time for me to wait for somebody to notify the managers of termination. Probably need to reduce that to say 6 hours, right? And you have that flexibility to then go back to the ODP, ODV section, find that parameter, change the value one time. You just type 4 hours or whatever it is that you're going to put, and it will propagate to the implementation statements here. And it will, if it's a published version, like we said earlier, if it's a published version of a document that's already in Document Hub, it will auto draft a new version. If you configure it this way, it'll auto draft the new version of that document with that new value. And then so that you have something to review and then publish, once you accept that change. That way you still maintain, like we said earlier, the old version with the old static value in case you wanted to, keep that alive until you're ready to move to the next version of the policy.
Yeah, this is where you're really seeing the payoff, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Inject them once, maintain them forever, kind of maintain them forever kind of perspective. So again, we could talk all day about examples of how this would be used and it's pretty much going to be used everywhere in Rev 3, hopefully by our users. It's kind of the reason why we implemented this feature in the first place. But I just want to, do a quick overview of just what this looks like practically, like a mental map workflow. So again, going back to the beginning, we're detecting the values existing. We have those automations and aids to help you get started on that without having to hand jam everything yourself. You define them and accept the values that were detected, right? You inject them into the places that they need to be, policies, procedures, your implementation statements. And then through the detection capabilities and through, say, setting up a Kanban task to go back and review the things that it detected, you stay consistent, you avoid drift, and you reconcile as you go. So one value defined once, correct everywhere. Again, this is the goal. This is the heart of this feature because we know with NIST 871 Rev 3 and also for you 853 users out there, we know that this is a big deal. We want to make sure that you're using this to its fullest capability. So just to wrap up here, we do have resources related to all this for all of our current users, active users that are wanting to learn more, read more about it, trying to get some aid to help set it up themselves or whatever. All the articles are live on our Zendesk support portal, user guides, release notes, all those things. You can find things relevant to this there. And then if you have, obviously feel free to follow up with an email or anything like that to your account managers or to the support team for any questions or whatever the case may be, or feedback. And for people who are not current IntelliGRC customers, obviously you don't have access to our support portal. So, you'll have to talk to people if you want more information on how this works before maybe trying it out or something like that. But what I would say, and this is me just expressing my heart for knowing the future, right? No, or not knowing the future, but assuming and presuming on the future is like talk to your account manager and try and start like actually playing around with ODVs.
Yeah. Yeah. Use our automated detection tools, right? At least see what kind of values it's pulling
Yeah.
from those different sources, from your evidence, right? Um, use the bulk value creation wizard to create them. And then you can go and play around with them, refine them from there.
Yeah, and just because you go and create these values and detect these values and assign them and whatnot to the different parameters, doesn't mean that it changes your documents automatically. It just means that you've laid the groundwork, like I said earlier. So you can you can start playing around with the ODVs and ODP section and not affect any of your documents or your implementation statements in your SSP at all. That's something that you can then do separately to then help apply those requirements. If that makes sense. All right, so we've yapped long enough. We care a lot about this because we just seen the labor that goes into it. So we wanted to make sure that we were clear on that. We've yapped long enough, so let's dive into any questions that came in over the time. All right, so we got a couple here. Oh wait, okay, it looks like some of them were answered already. Uh, well, I guess go ahead and ask any questions now. It looks like all three of them were answered.
Yeah, if we want to, I don't know if everyone has seen those. It could be,
Yeah, I think most of those were talking about like trials and like pricing, which again, this was meant to be more so helpful for people who are already users and whatnot. But we definitely want people to ask questions about that too. We're here for everything. Do you know if there is a timeline of implementation for allowing evidence, documentation, and artifacts to be independently attached to specific evaluations? Ah, yes. So this is essentially the question that you're asking is um, currently the current way evidence works is it's dependent on it's tenant wide, right? So you're mapping evidence and then it's applying to controls regardless of the evaluation you're in. And Jeremy, please speak up if you want to interject. But you're asking when can we expect the future state where there will be the ability to attach evidence to different hierarchical levels within your tenant, like global, tenant wide, boundary specific, and then evaluation specific. If I'm getting
yeah,
it, go ahead and
sounds right. Yep.
yeah. Do you want to speak to that, Jeremy?
Um, it is, I can't speak to the timeline. I would have to get with our product manager
No, it's
to
definitely on
see
the
that.
roadmap
Yeah, it's something that has been internally discussed quite a bit, and we will.
by me.
Well,
By
by a
me.
lot of us. Yeah,
Yeah, I that's a
it,
feature that I've been wanting for a long time. And
yeah,
so, well, not a long time. Like it's definitely on the roadmap, definitely being worked on and getting the requirements together for it. But yeah, we don't have an
yeah,
exact timeline right now, Michael.
yeah. We can get back to you though.
Yeah, sure we can follow up. You're welcome. Absolutely, you're welcome. What other questions we got? What other questions we got? Anything about Rev 3? Anything about um uh answer live, answer live. Anything about the recent news or anything like that? Again, this is an AMA. If there's other portions of the app that you want to talk about too,
Yeah,
definitely.
if there's no questions, one thing that we could mention is that um, we do have a similar feature after we did ODPs. People were like, "Hey, I want to create my own parameter or variable, right? Where I
Hmm.
could
Yeah.
identify anything and define that value. Maybe it's something like my EDR solution that could change, or maybe it's something as simple as like a company name." Um, so we do have functionality for you to create your own, what we're calling them variables. So they're separate from ODPs, and then define a value for those and use them throughout your policies and your implementation statements and things. We've seen some really cool adoption of
Yeah.
those and the way that people are using them. So that
Yeah.
would have
Nobody wants to type a chief information security officer manually.
for a
Um,
role, right? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, nobody wants to type that, so they create a variable and just say CISO, and then it has the fuller name or whatever it is. They have a shorthand, identifier, and they just hit the symbol for it, and it injects it really seamlessly. So yeah, nobody wants to do that. We learned that the hard way. Yeah. Um, what other questions we got? We had some seeded ones that we could go over just as like a basic FAQ also. So what happens to my existing Rev 2 evaluation if I update the ICL version? I don't know, Jeremy, if you want to talk about, the hypothetical scenario if they transition to the new ICL that has Rev 3 and all that. Is there anything that happens with the data that they already have? That might be a good thing to cover.
Yeah, so the new versions of the ICL, any of the changes that we make between versions are always documented. We put them in our release notes, and then we also maintain you know, articles of what changed in our user guide in the support portal. But typically, so for a framework like Rev 2, it hasn't changed much, recently. So we haven't really removed or added any assessment objectives or something. But if you're upgrading to a new ICL evaluation in order to adopt Rev 3, for all of our frameworks, we crosswalk them, against each other. So any content that is applicable to Rev 3 will carry over to that new evaluation with Rev 3. So um, it's gonna basically get you started, all right? Because if you've already implemented Rev 2, a lot of that work is going to go into Rev 3. Hopefully that answers that question. But if anybody has follow-ups.
Looks like there's a chat. Let me bring that up here. For MSPs managing multiple div clients, can we standardize ODP values across our whole client base, or does each org need its own justification? Um, what's the biggest mistake you're seeing people make right now as they prep for Rev 3? Well, I think I can answer probably the second piece of that, but if you want to talk about how multiple client works from the MSP's view in the admin app.
Yeah, absolutely. So for MSPs that are managing multiple clients, we touched on it a little bit. And I would definitely still recommend a demo of it or a walkthrough separately, but you can absolutely standardize those ODP values. And we've seen current provider customers do that, especially when they have an enclave approach, right? That they're managing on their customers' behalf. They can answer a lot of those questions, right? Of what that parameter is. So they can pre-populate those. They can even lock them so that they can't be changed in the client's tenant and then push those out.
Mm. Yeah, and I think for the latter question, what's the biggest mistake you see people making in regards to Rev 3 prep? Well, I think the biggest mistake that I'm seeing is the lack of prep towards Rev 3. Um, everybody is so And maybe mistake isn't the right word. I guess just concern, maybe. I don't think there's any like malintent or, purposeful laziness or anything like that. But I just think Rev 3 is coming, whether it's from the FAR CY rule or some type of new rulemaking under the CMMC 32 CFR expectations, all that jazz. But it's coming, and there's a lot of work like we've said before, on top of Rev 2 that needs to be accounted for and addressed and planned for and prepped for, and the documentation needs to look different. I mean, this topic that we're talking about right now, ODPs and ODVs, in and of itself is a kind of a new component that kind of formally and uniquely has to be addressed, even though, again, the assessment objectives acted in a similar way. Some of them did. But so I would just say what I've been advising when I'm, teaching an MSP, because we have an MSP enablement program where we kind of go through different phases and try to help MSPs become the type of MSPs that can support these div contractors well. Um, the 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 way that I've been advising people is you should probably, as you're implementing your Rev 2 requirements to kind of align with the current state of affairs, you should probably be at least considering the Rev 3 ODPs and ODVs and try to in tandem kind of knock two birds out with one stone. It's not always possible, right? It's not always the case, but like if you see that the DoD prescribes 16 character passwords, which they do, the Rev 3 ODPs and ODVs that they've prescribed, um, you may not necessarily right now be required to do that under Rev 2. You're not. There's no minimum value. You could technically say two character passwords. And hey, under the current prescriptions that might work. Um, but my suggestion is if it's at all possible to kind of get people to the point where they're using 16 character passwords, where passwords are being used. Obviously, there's a lot of password lists and stuff like that with Windows Hello for Business and all that jazz going around. Um, do it. That's kind of what we're saying to kind of future proof yourself and prep for Rev 3. But to answer the question, yeah, the biggest mistake I would say is the lack thereof, the lack of prep. I'm concerned that we're going to be in a similar boat to how Rev 3 and DFAR 7012, because DFAR 7012 is required whatever version of NIST 80171 is the current version at the time of solicitation. And so, aside from the class deviation that kind of locked everybody to Rev 2 for the time being, um, I'm concerned that it's going to be a similar problem. People are just going to wait. They're not spending time. They're not aware, right? So that's why we really are trying to evangelize the current state of affairs, but also the state of affairs we see coming down the pipe. We have a comment here from Chris, not a question, but a comment on Rev 3. Department of Energy customers have been asking for this for a while now. Yeah, we've seen similar agency specific expectations, and that's one thing why we were talking earlier in the presentation. And Jeremy, you can kind of add on to this, but we've been wanting to do Rev 3 for a while. Rev 3, the addition of Rev 3 was a desire for us because of comments like what Chris just said, where there was obvious situations where companies could have benefited from having Rev 3. And that's why, is because Rev 3 has already been required in other contexts. Ever since it was finalized, some agencies were starting to prescribe it out of the gate. I mean, GSA's IT procedural guide kind of moved to Rev 3 right out the gate. So yeah, no, we 100% agree, and we're thankful that we can finally, support it with also some useful features like the ODP ODV stuff to help aid in maintaining that and whatnot. I don't know, Jared, maybe if you have any other thoughts on that.
No, I agree.
Other questions we got here. Other questions. What frameworks are next? Jeremy?
So we just released earlier this month, just on the 8th of this month. So been a little over a week. We just released CMMC level 3. Um, So definitely check that out.
Oh, well, who knows what that'll look like? But yeah, yeah, yeah. Great
And
timing. Great timing.
yeah, and then we are currently actively working on CGIS. Not sure if anyone's familiar with that framework, but or that
Yeah,
or
CGIS. Yes.
yeah,
RJ,
so
you're dreamy. I'm not dreamy, you're dreamy. Oh, RJ, always a character. Get him out of here. There's like those Twitch streamers or something that are like, say, ban him right now. Ban that guy. Ban that guy. Okay, so CGS, that's good. I mean, we have a lot of on our
yeah,
roadmap.
we have a lot on our list,
Can you
right?
tease any like can you tease any ones that are coming after CGIS? If you
Well,
know off the top of your head, if it's not, it's okay. I'm
I have to,
curious as well.
I have to pull it up.
Anonymous attendee, how do you both maintain the best hair in the business? We don't. I woke up like this. And Jeremy is just intrinsically handsome. You know, I had to embarrass you, man. I had to take it. I had to take you down with me.
This is really really going off the rails here.
Yes, this is getting violent. Um, this person remained anonymous, so we can't really take jabs at them. Um, all right. Well, it's 1 o'clock, so this is kind of when we scheduled that we were going to end this. But we really appreciate people coming on and watching. We hope it was helpful, and not coming across as salesy or anything like that. We really do genuinely want people to adopt the feature, especially people who are already users, because we just think this will make people's lives easier. So we really appreciate you guys hopping on. Jeremy, any final words?
No, appreciate your all's time. It's been a pleasure.
All right, we'll follow up with again, the recording should be available as well as the slide deck will be sent to all the registrants. So, hey, thank you guys for joining, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye now.